So I'm going to talk a little bit about the previous speaker had some really good points. This is going to be a hard act to follow. I'll talk about our alliance with IBM Watson. IBM Watson is an investor in my company, Pathway Genomics. We started out as a genetic testing company about 8 years ago, and we do every kind of genetic test. We do whole genome sequencing, we do SNP-based tests, we do microarrays, we do everything. And we figured out that that's great. Genetics is really great, but what a lot of our patients and doctors were telling us, we have about 20,000 doctors in the US ordering our tests, they were telling us we want to be told what to do. Tell me what to do with all this medical information. So I literally called up IBM and said, look, we're interested in putting some sort of a consumer app together to collect all this type of medical information, not just genetics, and then tell the users what to do. And that's kind of the whole idea behind cognitive healthcare. So as the previous speaker mentioned, 90% of all the world's data was created in the last 2 years, but medical data doubles every 3 years, so it's even worse. So when I graduated from medical school, I'm about 5 times out of date at this point. I graduated about 15 years ago. And medical information by the year 2020 will double every 3 days. So there's, in my field, I was trained as a dermatologist, but in my field, there's about 1,000 publications in dermatology every month, and probably 60% of that is bad. They're going to end up being invalid. The data's no good. So curation is a very hard topic when it comes to all this data that's coming down the pike. And in a user's lifetime, you'll generate about 1 terabyte of medical data. That's from IBM Watson, which is about 300 million books. And healthcare, at least in the United States, is really changing. It's really moving towards a consumer model. We can't pay for the healthcare and to democratize healthcare so everybody gets the same type of healthcare is a very hard problem, again. And we can't pay for it in the United States. It's probably much like the NHS here in the UK. And so the consumer is becoming much more powerful. He's learning, he knows much more about what's going on. There's more information coming down that he can get access to. And then how do you manage a lot of this information? Well, again, going back to the statement I said about, people want to be told what to do. How are you going to do that with all that terabytes and terabytes of information? Well, really about the only way to do that is with some sort of cognitive artificial intelligence or machine learning, and that's one of the reasons we got involved with Watson. So some of the trends that we see, again, this is based on United States data, but personalization is a big issue, which means I want healthcare that's personalized to me, not to you, to me. I want the drug that's personalized to me. I want to be told what to eat that's personalized to me. I want to be told what exercise to do that's personalized to me. And then the genetics and epigenetics part of it is kind of the central focus for a lot of the new data that's coming out. And so in the US, healthcare costs are driven by obesity in most issues, most cases. 60% of cancers, 80% of cardiovascular disease, 80% of diabetes, all related to obesity. By 2020, obesity will be the #1 causer, if you will, of cancer, not smoking in the United States. Obesity is outstripping smoking. But anyway, we have a $2 trillion healthcare budget, and most of it is preventable. So that's another thing that we kind of understood from our patients, is we want to be told stuff to do that will prevent me from getting sick. Going to the doctor is no fun. And healthcare in general is not a fun proposition. So just tell me, how to prevent myself from getting ill. And it's been estimated that if you could do that, if you could put some sort of data analytics around a prevention device or a prevention mobile platform, you'd save maybe $300 billion out of the $2 trillion healthcare budget in the United States. So I'm going to talk a little about genetics to show you how complicated it really is. 22,000 genes. If you took out a piece of your DNA, took one cell and took out the DNA and strung it out, it's about 6 feet tall. So you multiply that by a couple trillion cells in your body, you've got to the sun and back, information quotient. One whole genome sequence is about 500 gigabytes of data. That's about 50 DVDs stacked up on top of each other. And it cost us, I was the doctor of record on the first, excuse me, I'm a little cold. Doctor of record on the first person that was ever sequenced in the United States by Illumina in 2009. And that cost $350,000. And that was a gentleman from the UK named Herman Hauser. Anybody know that guy? He's a real rich VC that lives here in London, actually right next door to Stephen Hawking's. But anyway, I was a doctor of record on that. That cost $350,000. Now you can get a whole genome sequence from us for $1,000. And in 5 years, it'll be down to $500 plus the report. And then in the US, everybody probably gets it done then. And insurance will end up paying for it. So genetic testing, a lot of these is becoming a commodity, just like anything else. And the interesting thing is in a patient's electronic health record, about 70% of the data is laboratory test data. So it's not, doctors scribbling in notepads and all this kind of stuff. It's lab tests, cholesterol tests, blood pressure, heart rate, genetic testing, all that kind of stuff. So the test data is really important. And there's a lot of different types of data. In this slide, I put together, there's you down at the bottom, and then your x-rays up at the top, and then all the stuff in between, your metabolomics, your genomics, your epigenomics, your social graph, patients like me. There's all these different types of medical information. And as a doctor, we've always practiced personalized medicine. I never practiced, but you guys that do, you practice personalized medicine. Now there's just a lot more tools and a lot more different types of data that has to be analyzed in order to give personalized results. That's what we're trying to do. So in cognitive computing is kind of a trademark name that IBM came up with. At least they're trying to trademark it. And the AI revolution started in 1956 at Dartmouth, where they kind of determined what AI meant, artificial and intelligence. And then it's kind of moved, in the last 10 years, it's become much more valid because of CPUs and hierarchical algorithms. I'm not going to go into that very much, but deep learning includes supervised and unsupervised. What we do with IBM Watson is much more on the supervised side. And AI is everywhere, but the reason it's gotten really popular, and I wasn't here for the first part of this conference, but maybe somebody's already mentioned this, but the reason it's gotten popular is you can make money at it. When I give talks in front of doctors, I always make a comment that the only way to get doctors to do anything is if you pay them. My father was a doctor. You can't get paid in chickens anymore. So there's a lot of money to be made in artificial intelligence, and that's why people are after it. I mean, there was a PhD student at Berkeley who was hired last week to Google, and they're paying him $1 million in his starting salary. That's astonishing for natural language processing engineer. And it's only because they think there's so much promise for all these areas. And healthcare is the worst data that there is. It's the algorithms that are used in healthcare, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. Most of them are algorithms that are probability statistics algorithms, and that's perfect for healthcare because there's so much data, it doesn't talk to each other, and you need some sort of artificial intelligence in order to get it to work. And part of it also is this kind of perceptron thing where you've got the environmental sensors and then the AI is an agent and then trying to make decisions. And so the sensor information can be anything, electronic health record, it can be a genetic test, it can be just about anything that's of interest to you, and you've got to incorporate that into any kind of system. And most of the algorithms, or at least the learners, as we call them in the business, are Bayesian as classifiers, using Bayesian inference. And we use a little bit of support vector machines when we deal with Watson because we had to build our own AI on top of Watson. So Watson is good at reading books. It's good at reading books, and you have to train it on that unstructured healthcare information, but it's not good at personalization. It cannot do that at all. So we had to make our own classifier and our own learners in order to grab the data and then personalize it. And one of the ways, I think, in medicine and in healthcare, at least what I've seen and we've seen, is most of the learners are either Bayesian or they're decision trees. And I was trained, as a doctor, you're trained in clinical diagnosis as a decision tree, just a very fancy tree of if this, then that, does he have this, does he have that, and it just kind of goes down this long tree. And so a lot of the learners are based on that technology too. And as an example, I show here there's also a neural network with backpropagation, which is also part of some of the learners that are used in medicine. But we don't necessarily use that for our classifiers. We really just use decision trees and also support vector machines. And then some of the stuff that's also in Watson and is dumped in Watson is based on 3 basic things: classifiers, regression, and ranking. Right? The classifiers, go get the information and classify it into certain learners. The regression algorithms like support vector machines are used to kind of put hyperplanes between things, and then the ranking algorithms are really important. So I pulled out this paper, and this might have been talked about earlier, but for druggable proteins, for pharmaceutical companies, druggability is a really very hot topic for machine learning, but there's only been 7 major papers in the last 5 years around using machine learning for druggable proteins. And part of that is that the data is really messy. And so you're talking about using these fancy algorithms on the left-hand side like support vector machines, but the area under the curve, you're only getting 69% predictability, 69%. That's not good enough in healthcare. In healthcare, we're, as the previous speaker said, we're regulated very heavily. So if you try to put out some sort of algorithm or a machine learning program or application, and you're only getting about 69% reliability, that ain't going to work. The FDA is not going to like that. You're going to have a lot of qualifiers in there to get that approved. And then the third thing, or the fourth thing that IBM Watson did is they went out and they bought a company called Merge that had 1 billion CAT scans and MRI plates. And they're trying to train it with their visual recognition program using convolutional neural networks, and then linking that to natural language processing to this is a tumor or this is not a tumor, kind of thing. But that's a much longer term process. So this is the architecture. This is kind of a very ground-up architecture around what IBM Watson is, and it's a deep Q&A architecture. It's basically classifiers that classify, we tokenize all the words, and then come up with responses. So what Watson's really good at is, what is cystic fibrosis, or what are the genes in cystic fibrosis? Tell me something about cystic fibrosis. Again, it is no good in personalization. So that whole personalized part is something that we put a lot of effort into what we're doing. And part of it also is because, Tim Cook got up a couple weeks ago and said that in 2016 that most people will trust their handset for healthcare information more than their doctors. Well, I was on a cab ride coming in from the airport yesterday, and this lovely gentleman was complaining about the national NHS. I can't see my doctor. I can't get in front of my doctor. I've got blood pressure. I can't get in front of it. It's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. You can't make an appointment. Then I asked him, well, would you talk to your phone about doing something like this? And he goes, hell no. The phone's not the doctor. I said, well, if we could put some sort of cognitive function in the phone, what kind of down the pike, and kept talking to him about this. Would you be interested in doing that? Well, yeah, maybe. I have to go see the doctor every 3 weeks. If I could get something in a cell phone that's really helping me, prevent things from happening to begin with, or helping me, get on the right medication, yeah, I'd really be interested in something like that. And so the idea is to put all these multiple networks together, and try to change people's behavior. So we're in the business, as a doctor, you're in the business of changing people's behaviors. Eat this, don't eat that, do this exercise, don't do that. But it goes in and out of the, most people's ears, or take this drug, don't take this drug. But if you give them a little bit of scientific information about certain things, and especially around all this newfangled omics and genomics technology, my Fitbit data, what I ate today, if you can collect all that, and then, back it up with evidence-based medicine is the core, which is really what Watson is. Watson's got 20 million PubMed references in it. It's got every textbook of medicine and surgery and whatever diagnostics you can possibly imagine. It's trained on that stuff. So you take all the personalized stuff and then you use Watson. Well, that's something that could be potentially really powerful. And that's kind of what we were doing. But again, the problem space in healthcare is always that a lot of this different types of data, your electronic health record doesn't talk to your insurance data, which is important too, which doesn't talk to, the pharmacy, which doesn't talk to it's a perfect problem for cognitive or artificial intelligence. And one of the reasons the previous speaker said this, everybody's got a cell phone, right? The guy might be on a rice paddy in the middle of Thailand, but he's got a cell phone. And how do you get, that information to the person? So the digital health market is booming, but about 70% of it, 70% of the downloads, 70% around prevention, exercise, weight loss. Those two things. I've got 5 minutes. Exercise and weight loss. And the number one distribution site are the app stores, not the hospitals. There's 166,000 medically related apps in the App Store, but only 2% of them get over 10,000 downloads. The rest of them are all called zombie apps. So these are apps that are going to sit there for 2 years at 10,000 downloads or less and not get used. And the part of that is because the engagement component of them is bad. And nobody wants to see a bunch of graphs and even, tell me, I don't want to do that. I need to be engaged. I need to feel like I'm part of this whole process. I need to feel like this AI, or whatever you want to call it, is making my life better. And so, what we're doing is putting together this system, with cognitive healthcare and IBM, where we're taking all these different types of data, the MRIs and everything you can think of, as part of your personal graph, and then using Watson and other technologies to make sense of it. Within the guise of, if somebody asks, should I change my warfarin today? The FDA is not going to like it if we say, well, you've got a genetic, you're a slow metabolizer for warfarin based on your genetics. Yeah, go out and lower your dose by, 10 grams. The FDA would not like that at all. In fact, something like that probably wouldn't even get approved, even in the long run. They want the doctor to be involved. And so we find it very, very necessary to involve the physician. So that means in this application that we're building, the physician is certainly involved. And there is some precedence for it. I pulled this out from an article in Cell by Zevi. It came out a month ago. And what they did is they used a machine learning algorithm, and they took genetics, microbiome, blood tests, questionnaires, whatever, food diary. They built this algorithm and then decided what you should eat and to give you a low glycemic response. And the results were pretty astonishing. They got up to 99% specificity. They did a clinical trial with 2,000 people, and they were able to predict, with a little bit of information, that you should eat that instead of eating that. Well, that's something that's useful. And what they did in terms of the algorithms, they used a decision tree. Like I mentioned earlier, it's with AdaBoost, which is another kernel. But they used a decision tree, and they basically did something that I learned in medical school, and they just kind of put this all together and made a really neat little algorithm out of it. And so our application is called OM. OM. It's powered by IBM Watson. I have to say that since they're investors in us, so I kind of have to be nice to those guys. So we think it's the first precision medicine application that's incorporating a lot of genetics, a lot of laboratory results, and we'll go out and get it. We'll go out and you give us permission. There's now a law in the United States that any consumer has the right to get any lab test from the large laboratory companies at any time. So that was not possible a year ago. It's now possible. So we can go and get that, a lot of the information. And it's a natural language processing engine. You can talk to it. You can ask it questions. It'll know that you're walking down the street, and it'll tell you, based on all this information that I've collected, if you ask it what I should do for my workout today, it'll tell you, well, you're near Central Park. You should go for a couple-mile run because you didn't do that last week. And oh yeah, you've got a gene in CYP1A2, so you're a slow metabolizer for caffeine. So only take 1 cup of coffee, and you've got a buddy that's down there, blah, blah, blah. It just goes down the decision tree, and then it gives you very, very concrete, things to do. And it'll follow you and give you information. It'll ping you when it's necessary. It's very dynamic and actionable. And so the app is called OM, and I've got a demo on my phone if you'd like to come up and see it afterwards. And that's about it. It actually worked in London. I walked down the street and I asked it, what should I eat today? And well, because of this and this and this, there's this great sushi restaurant down the street called Pham. And I went in there and ate last night. Man, was that good. That place was really, it was and pretty expensive too, but it was good. So it worked for me. And so the final word is, for my favorite philosopher of all time, I combined a DNA test kit with big data to predict a person's future health issues. That depressing knowledge caused every member of the test group to make risky lifestyle choices. Now they're all dead, or half of them are dead. At the risk of bragging, that's exactly what my model predicted. This is great. All right, thank you. Some references.